Bujold. And both Genevieve Bujold and Natalie Dormer were much more the Anne icons for this generation than, for instance, Natalie Portman's Anne in the movie, who generally was derided, right? So I thought it was really important to talk to both Genevieve Bujold and to talk to Natalie Dormer to find out what their conceptions of Anne were. And I discovered that they really did bring something to their respective roles that was very different from what anyone else, any actresses or any authors, had brought to their interpretations of Anne, and that was able to catch the imagination of today's young women. Had a wonderful conversation with Genevieve Bujold on the telephone, and she told me about how Anne made her happy, and how Anne, to her understanding, was a fiercely independent, proud person, not evil, but very much invested in her own individuality and her own personhood. And that's the Anne that comes across in Anne of a Thousand Days. You know, the rebel, not the temptress, right? Not the victim, but the proud, defiant rebel. That famous scene. I mean, everybody knows that scene. Didn't actually happen, but as some people have said to me, if it didn't happen, it should have happened, where Anne tells Henry off on no uncertain terms. She's in the Tower awaiting her execution, and he's come with an offer. Now, this didn't happen, actually. Right? It's a fiction of the movie.
So we'll start with this didn't happen, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good.
This didn't actually happen. It's made up. But what happens in the scene is that Anne has just been reflecting on the 1,000 days of her relationship with Henry and thinking about how she loved him for 300 days, and then he loved her, and then he hated her, and there was one day when their loves met. And it's a really beautiful meditation on the fragile nature of reciprocal love. And Henry comes in, and he's got an offer for her. The offer is if she will give up, if she will declare Elizabeth illegitimate and give up her rights to the queenship, he will allow her to live. Anne refuses defiantly, and not only does she refuse, but she launches into an impassioned speech in which she tells a grotesquely enormous lie to Henry, but one that is designed to shoot an arrow right into his masculine pride. She says, I'm a whore. Yes, I'm a whore. I've slept with every man in the court, right? Not just with the men who I've been charged with, but with stable hands and other musicians and everyone. And you may be killing me, but look around every day of your life after I'm gone at every man in the court and wonder if he has slept with me. And you take that to your grave. Now, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. I haven't memorized the speech. But then she goes on to say, but Elizabeth is yours. Watch her as she grows. She will be a far greater monarch than you have ever been. She just demolishes Henry, right? It's such an emotionally satisfying speech that the fact that there is absolutely no historical evidence for it. In fact, it's really happened in a very, very different way. I mean, Elizabeth was declared a bastard without Anne's, given any kind of choice at all. It recreates history in a way so that people can feel that what didn't happen but should have happened, happened. So her Anne is really iconic. Then you get many, many decades later, Natalie Dormer. And I was very lucky to meet Natalie Dormer in England. I met her in England, and it was after she had ceased, she was no longer under contract to Showtime. So I got a lot of really interesting inside information about what went on in the making of it, and I talk about that in the book. And there's a lot from my interview with Natalie in the book. But what I would emphasize here is that she really, Natalie Dormer really knew her history, right? She was not someone who was ready to simply submit to some director's conception of who Anne was. She had a very clear idea of who Anne was. And she knew as much, if not more, as Michael Hirst, who was the creator and director of the series. And the extraordinary thing about Natalie Dormer is that she fought for her conception of Anne. She fought every step of the way. The first season of The Tudors was very sexed up. And I interviewed Michael Hirst, and he acknowledges that he did it in order to be able to win an audience. He had some serious points he wanted to make, but he knew that to get a primetime audience, especially in the United States, he'd have to heat it up. And he went a little overboard, you might say. And the result was that a lot of the reviews talked about it and talked about Natalie's role. You know, she's just this sex pot. And Natalie was really hurt by that, and she was hurt for Anne because that's not how she saw Anne. And though she was a very young actress, really at the start of her career, she went to Michael Hirst and she told him at the end of the first season, Michael, you've got to write this differently, right? I don't want the audience, when Anne goes to the scaffold, I want the audience to see her as a real human being. I want not a stereotype of a conniving slut. I want them to see her as someone with whom they can identify. I want them to sympathize with her. I want them to feel her death. And if this means that you have to bring in all kinds of difficult acting challenges for me, I'm ready for it. Throw it at me, right? Bring in the politics, bring in the intrigue. I'm ready for it. And to his credit, Michael Hirst listened to her, and he did do that. And in the second season, Anne does become a different kind of persona than in the first season. Now, historians may find the changes not significant, but they were significant for the young women who had been watching the series, right? They registered. They really registered. And in fact, by the time Natalie Dormer's Anne went to her death, everyone was crying. I mean, she really had built a very different conception of Anne for your average viewer. Again, not necessarily for the historians. Historians were constantly finding fault with the series for its historical errors. But for your average viewer, it really did transform the conception of Anne Boleyn. Very different one from the other Boleyn girls.
Okay, you sort of touched on this too, but
Remind me, Paul was going to